Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. In the course of the last 10 days, it seems like a head to head situation has developed between the government of India on the one hand and big tech on the other. Multiple issues, of course, have led to this situation. The biggest development over the last couple of days is the fact that WhatsApp has chosen to move court protesting against or opposing the recent IT laws that were introduced by the government. They are, of course, called the Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules for 2021. And WhatsApp says that these rules require it to trace the origin of a particular message that would in turn compel it to break its privacy protection clause to its users. Remember, many smaller news outfits were already protesting against what they thought would be an excessive clampdown on their freedom of speech, as also the fact that the end user would be impacted in terms of what the content might actually be that they could read for themselves or watch for themselves. Aside from that, it looks like there's a bit of an intense situation developing with another big tech player, which is Twitter. A couple of days back, there was an ominous visit to Twitter's office by the Delhi police after Twitter marked one of the tweets of BJP spokesperson Sambit Patra as manipulated content. All that was, of course, followed by a flurry of clarifications. And at this point, because of the situation between big tech and the government in terms of the IT rules, there have been some rumors, unfounded, about the fact that some of these platforms may shut down in India. Where do things stand? Where might they go now, especially considering the fact that WhatsApp has decided to take the legal recourse for itself? And will these laws now get a rethink, as has been demanded by many people from the media and the content fraternity? Joining me to talk about that are two gentlemen: Nikhil Pahwa, who is founder at Medianama, and Apar Gupta, who is executive director of the Internet Freedom Foundation of India. Nikhil and Apar, thank you for joining in. I know you probably have seen each other at different platforms quite frequently over the last week, and you can't say that's a bad thing, because I'm glad this conversation is happening more actively. But let me start with the here and now, and then we'll take a couple of steps back. Apar, let me start with you in terms of explaining to people where things stand now with WhatsApp moving court and deciding to take a legal path.
I'll take a step back.
Yeah.
On 25th of February, the government comes out with some new rules. Who do they impact? They impact not only WhatsApp, but all social media platforms, but also smaller intermediaries, everything which facilitates any kind of posting or messaging function of any other internet user, which is not authored by them, provides them a technical facility. The other segment it impacts is online video streaming, like Amazon Prime or Netflix or Disney Hotstar. And the third vertical it impacts is, for instance, viewers of The Wire or readers of Medianama, is these platforms itself, digital news publishers, right? And news publishers, online video streaming platforms, social media platforms, all are regulated under the IT rules. So in effect, their impact is the sum total of the experience for every internet user in India. And just very quickly on the challenge to the IT rules by WhatsApp, it is restricted to one provision of the rules and the regulations made under it, under the IT rules, which is Rule 4x4, much more closely, as it's coming out in the press. And this is a requirement for what is called as traceability, which undermines end-to-end encryption. We'll talk more about it later, I'm sure.
Yeah. Nikhil, in fact, that's important that Apar raised this, because I think as a small media house, we've been speaking extensively about it. But here's where finally some of the big guys are speaking out. As Apar said, the smaller media or news outfits had already moved court, but this is when you're seeing big action happening from a big guy. What is it that WhatsApp is saying? And we already have some kind of a reaction in place from the government. If you could put both of those in perspective.
So just before I get to WhatsApp, just on a broader holistic picture, when the IT rules first came out in 2011, I'd call them the internet control rules, because they were effectively impacting intermediaries and platforms, etc. Yeah. The level of control that's being exercised through these rules this time is exponential compared to that one, and it's far more aggressive. And so every aspect of our usage of the internet is going to get impacted. Not a single user of the internet in India is going to be in a position where some part of their experience of the internet doesn't change because of the control that the government is going to be able to exercise here. On the WhatsApp part of it, look, it's an interesting situation, especially given what's happened with WhatsApp's privacy policy, where users have pushed back against it. They have been unhappy that WhatsApp is trying to force them to accept this privacy policy, that they're trying to share data with Facebook. And so, rightly so, I've heard from people that, they feel it's hypocritical of WhatsApp to go to court to protect privacy. But we have to look at both of these instances in isolation, because effectively what WhatsApp is also going to court to protect is Signal. The Signal protocol gets impacted by these rules in the same way. So whether you use WhatsApp or don't want to use it, whether you use Signal or don't want to use it, it's encryption that gets impacted, and it's end-to-end encryption, which is so far one of the most private forms of encryption available, which keeps where even the platform doesn't know who you are messaging, and can't read the content of your message. All of that gets protected. The operative part for me here is that if you're not happy with WhatsApp's privacy policy, just remember that these rules create a situation where WhatsApp will potentially have to re-architect its entire platform, and actually, because of the government's mandate, have to collect more data about you. So it's actually, they'll have to note the originator of every message under these rules. And so if you don't want WhatsApp collecting more data, you should actually support WhatsApp in this case. And if Signal goes to court, and I hope they will, support them too. The government is pushing back on WhatsApp's case and essentially saying that they don't have, they're not asking for any break of privacy. They're asking WhatsApp to enable the traceability because they have legitimate reasons for wanting to trace people who may be committing a crime for investigation purposes. And those, when you look at that aspect, you do think that that's a legitimate ask, right? Why wouldn't you want WhatsApp to be in a position to give information about a child pornographer, about a terrorist? But the problem is one of proportionality. If WhatsApp has to re-architect its entire platform and start taking note of the originator of every message to be able to give information about that one user that the government wants, then effectively you're compromising the privacy of everyone for trying to catch that one person. And so, is it proportionate or not? And I'm sure we'll get into the right to privacy case and how that impacts this case, because this is a very, very important case. This, along with the others that have been filed around IT rules, the Free Software Movement of India also been involved. I think this is going to impact privacy for us going forward.
Yeah. Apar, as Nikhil points out, one is the proportionality argument, but the other argument has also been for specific cases like the one Nikhil pointed out, laws already exist. Does the fact that WhatsApp has now moved court mean that finally these laws will go back to what people had been asking for, which is go back to the drawing board, relook at this, take in more opinion and feedback, reconstruct this another way? Do you think that could be, one outcome of this situation?
See, the way it will also be seen, let's take it from the other perspective. Who's WhatsApp? WhatsApp is a foreign corporation which is giving a great service due to which it has a large number of users on its platform. But what are WhatsApp's own practices? It has been taken before that same Delhi High Court for changes in its privacy policy, which are not providing any option to users, and is also arguably without that option now sharing greater amounts of your information, which again don't have clarity how much information is being shared with Facebook and with business users. And the government of India in that case, in fact, is saying, please don't enforce your privacy policy. Okay. So we had a very interesting meme being drawn up by one of our staffers in which there are two Spider-Mans each pointing to each other, in which the government takes a WhatsApp to court, which is a bit technically incorrect because it's a PIL and the government is filing a reply and a counter affidavit there. And the second is in terms of WhatsApp taking the government to court in this. Again, I will say the WhatsApp petition is significant but does not challenge the entire rules. It is limited. Yeah. So people, when they're saying that this is a very significant case, it just brings it to the limelight that a lot of other problems are there in the IT rules. And I think that's where the value lies. In terms of the outcome of what may happen here, I wouldn't like to prejudge it, but there are severe deficiencies and has been noted. So the first thing is the requirement which they're challenging is called traceability. It is that the originator of each message needs to be identifiable by WhatsApp. And here the technical analysis which has been done firstly by a IIT professor who rendered legal expert opinion which was used in a legal filing. Professor Manoj Prabhakaran actually shows that there are impacts to a user's privacy. And secondly, the justification and the reasons for introducing a traceability are not well borne out in terms of the feasibility itself. So it's basically people becoming identifiable for each message they send without any constructive benefit of checking in on fake news, etc., the kind of things it's supposed to address. The second is a technical opinion given by about a roundtable of 50 people organized by the Internet Society under Chatham Rules, which has also been cited by the Mozilla Corporation, again, a body which does make technical product and is in fact acknowledged as a good actor in this space, given its maker of several products which are used to in fact help us preserve our privacy online. So I'll stop here. The WhatsApp case is significant. The outcomes from that can't be predetermined, but there are very good arguments to be made just on the basis of the technical viability, which flow into the Puttaswamy doctrine and standards, which I will hopefully discuss a little later.
Apar, but let me ask you a follow-up question on that. Because I think for folks trying to understand this debate, there's just so much technical talk around what's happening, but it just looks like obfuscation. I mean, I'm looking at Minister Prasad's comments where he says, and I'm quoting, the entire debate on whether encryption would be maintained or not is misplaced. Whether right to privacy is ensured, using encryption technology or some other technology is entirely the purview of the social media intermediary. The government of India, on its part, is committed to ensuring right of privacy to all its citizens, etc., etc. It's WhatsApp's responsibility to find a technical solution. But, they're talking at cross purposes, right? I mean, there is no other technical solution over here. This is not helping anyone's case.
Yes, this is correct. And Minister Prasad actually put out a statement after the fundamental right to privacy was upheld by the Supreme Court of India, in which the Union of India welcomed it. However, I was a junior lawyer in the Puttaswamy case, and I saw the government itself dispute it. So the Union of India has had very contradictory and inconsistent stands in protecting the fundamental right to privacy. One of the primary ways of ensuring it is by making a user-centric, privacy-respecting data protection law. But the data protection law draft, which was proposed by his own ministry before the floor of parliament and is now pending before a joint parliamentary committee, is very problematic. It has large exemptions. For instance, the government power to notify any department from exemption from the application of the data protection law. It does not have any chapter on surveillance reform. And these are very worrying signs. WhatsApp on its own end wants to collect more user data, but at the same point in time has one very important feature which helps us safeguard our privacy. And the government is saying, take that away. Okay. So they are talking each other to each other from cross purposes, but what is actually preserving and helping our rights today is end-to-end encryption deployed by WhatsApp. So it falls to people that they should support the principal repeal of regulation 4 by 4, which is asking for traceability. And the other comment which he's made with respect to that we'll require you to do something, and then you find a technical solution to it, and it falls to you. What is being forgotten is it's not only about WhatsApp.
Yeah.
It applies to any platform with more than 5 million users. And as per the teleconnectivity data, which I just checked on TRAI, India has close to 743 million active broadband connections. Okay, so it takes very little time for people to, for a platform to get to that scale. And encryption is one of the principal technologies which is used, and is used in a very widespread way. So it's not about WhatsApp. It's not also only about Signal or Telegram. It's about a threat to an entire technology being deployed, which helps us when these legal protections are not there to safeguard us and keep our conversations and also correspondence private.
Hmm. Nikhil, let me ask you to come in on that. In terms of the fact that now this whole debate has become big tech versus the government, where I think organizations like yours and APARs at Internet Freedom have been talking extensively about, what about the individual? When the smaller news outfits moved court, people said, chalo, they're the chota guys, they have a problem with this. The big media outfits try to carve out a solution of their own. But now this impacts folks like WhatsApp and Facebook. It impacts OTT, etc. Also, ultimately, the guy who's losing is the individual user, right?
Yeah, the user is the loser here, unfortunately, Mitali. Look, I think as a society, we're in a space where we need to have more conversations about this, because there are really no easy answers to these problems. So we want to protect our freedoms online, but we also want harmful speech to be controlled. We want our privacy to be protected, but we also want criminals to be caught. We want we want the platforms to not have too much power over you and risk our democracies, but at the same time we don't want to give power to our government. And that these are fundamental debates that we need to have. And I don't think we should jump the gun and enforce rules like this, which essentially empower the government against platforms. Because while we need protection from platforms manipulating our speech and our experience of the internet, we also need to ensure that they don't become tools in the hands of the government to impact our freedoms. That's where we are headed right now, more control. Um, just like these rules give the government more control over WhatsApp and over privacy, the other part of the rules give the government more control over platforms when it comes to freedom of speech. And is more government control really what we want over here? Is more platform control really what we want over here? So how do we reduce the power of platforms without increasing the power of the governments, of governments across the world, in fact, is something that still needs to be discussed and debated. And I think the solution there lies in identifying the sources of power of the platforms and finding ways of empowering users. I mean, that's the high level solution that I think we need to work on on globally. Unfortunately, in trying to rein in the power of platforms, we are at this point in time as a country only strengthening the government, and I don't think that's a good situation for us to be in, especially given the activities from the government is especially this year. If you remember the face-off between the government and Twitter in Jan and Feb, um, Twitter had alleged that the government sent them unlawful orders. Those unlawful, and if the government is sending them unlawful orders, who checks the government? So a part of the IT rules for Section 69, essentially the rules for Section 69 basically allow the government to keep these orders secret, and it's reviewed only by a committee of government officials. So the potential for capture over there, the potential for abuse of that privilege is very significant. And so it's we need more transparency and accountability from the government as well as from platforms. How do we get there is something that we still need. That conversation, I think, we still need to have. And these rules are not the right approach. I mean, Apar can go into the legality of it, but very clearly they go outside the ambit of the IT Act, and they are essentially a means to enforcing what the government wants without it actually having the legitimacy of Parliament, uh, changing the IT Act to allow these rules. That's also not the best solution, in my opinion, because that will still impinge on privacy and on freedom of expression. So these challenges at a constitutional level are extremely important, because at the end of it, we have to rely on the Supreme Court to ensure that our freedoms are protected. And but it's also, one should not forget that the government has bypassed Parliament in putting these rules out, and that's a precedence that I'm very, very worried about. I mean, even if you look at the control that's being exerted over streaming services and over online news, they have no legitimacy here to create an entire regulatory structure, which the IT Act and so what recourse do we have as citizens when our government is actually not following the law? Go to court. And I think more people will need to go to court.
The other problem, Nikhil, is that because of this, I mean, I don't know, I'm looking for the right term to, to place this, but this attitude of very hard-handed behavior and really clamping your boot down, I think it sort of really triggers off even more anxiety and fear and misinformation. For example, over the last 48 hours, because, that deadline was approaching for many of these companies to comply with what the Act asked, there was a flurry of rumors about, Twitter is shutting down, goodbye everyone, Facebook is shutting down. And I know, a lot of folks like you guys went on to say, look, it doesn't work like that. But that's sort of one fear that's working with people, saying, if they don't like it too much, they're just going to shut it down. Do you want to address that for someone who's wondering, whether this is a real consequence?
Well, it is a real consequence given what happened with the Chinese apps in India. They issued orders for blocking over 200 Chinese apps under Section 69. Of course, this is not these rules will not lead to the banning of apps. That's very clear. But the fear is real. We're also seeing a situation, if you just take a step back and look at the direction in which India is headed, we are trying to exert more control over the internet as a country, and we are trying to carve out an Indian internet. There is this pushback against digital colonization that's been spoken about repeatedly. These companies being are treated as foreign companies colonizing the Indian internet. And you're trying to create room for alternatives. So if you notice, when TikTok got banned, a bunch of apps came in to come and take that $1 billion opportunity. That creates an environment where Indian businesses and Indian startups are now trying to play up that digital nationalism and that tech nationalism to create more space for themselves. Because tomorrow, if let's say Twitter gets banned, a coup is here to take its place. Right, and in the same vein, if WhatsApp gets banned, then there'll be an alternative that will come to take its place. These are $1 billion opportunities. Now, what does this mimic? It mimics China, right? Baidu became far more important, far more pervasive when Google exited China in the early part of the century. China has managed to build an entire internet ecosystem with its large population, and India has got a large population as well. Again, because foreign companies stayed out or were kept out of the market. China controls the internet through its startup ecosystem, through its tech ecosystem. They have censors for content there, right? The way I see it, is these rules are the first step towards creating that environment. A slow boiling, if you may, and bit by bit, step by step, giving government more control through platforms. Now, my guess is a coup is more likely to, because it's an Indian company and the Indian government is all powerful here, is more likely to comply with even unlawful orders if they might come with the government. I'm not saying that they will, but an Indian company is more likely to comply. It's this environment of forced compliance that is being created through constant badgering. And you've seen how Twitter has been badgered over the last year or so. There have been cases filed against Twitter employees across the country. These rules create a situation for a compliance officer, a chief compliance officer, who will have criminal liability if safe harbor gets removed.
Yeah.
So in that environment, the government gets absolute control over the internet. And I think we're slowly going there. And so that's why I say that India has China envy. At ORF, I think Sameer talks about the fourth way, for India. And I think the Indian government's adopted that idea that we're not going to do things the way the US has done. We're not going to do things the way Europe has done. But we're also not going to go as far as China has gone. But a fourth way, by the looks of it, seems to be somewhere in between the EU and China, right? And so we seem to be gradually leaning towards the Chinese approach. And I think that's going to be bad for citizens, for democracy. But I can see the signs. There's more control being exerted over data. And that's because you see data as the new oil. And there's more control being exerted over speech. It looks like it's going to get worse.
Apar, you want to jump in on that? At this point, I think Ku is the only one that has a CCO, I think he or she is called now, the Chief Compliance Officer. I don't know if
MyGov also has.
Oh,
the government department, MyGov also has.
That's right. Both of them do. Do you sense, Apar, that there's a degree of bipolarity in this argument? One is the government is the bad guy, and the other is that, well, the tech is also the bad guy because they're not answerable to the government. They answer only to the US government. What's happening here? And do you actually think this is a real fear that there could be a day where they say, okay, shut it all down?
So, I do think that a certain environment already exists against technology businesses, which they themselves have contributed towards due to how they have conducted their business practices in India. For instance, if one looks at the hate speech, which has been enabled by Facebook and the Wall Street Journal disclosures only a few months back, there were differential standards which were applied in the United States and India. Yeah. And the disclosure and the reporting actually showed that as per the public policy representative or head in India, Ms. Akidas, these same standards could not be applied for two reasons. The first one was the business prospects of Facebook India, and the second was the safety and the security of its staff. Now, these differential standards which are being followed in India become much more stark when you look at, for instance, the human rights or the civil rights review which has been conducted by Facebook in United States. And here, despite after the Delhi riots happening, in which there have been citizens report, which does say that content and disinformation which was spurred through certain platforms, including Facebook, did play a contributing role in it. There is no such inquiry which has been publicly committed. And these points of distinction keep repeating itself, event by event. And not only limited to Facebook, but several Silicon Valley companies. Now, will this step towards a ban? But is a very large question and is actually a geopolitical question, because what we have also seen has been another report which has come out 2 days back, and that is with respect to how the State Department as well as the US Embassy are actively taking a keen interest in how technology companies are being examined with respect to the regulation in India, and this concerns Amazon. Okay, and this is a story by Aditya Kalra again, and this is at the very high ministerial levels. So that is a geopolitical issue. But the first thing is, have large American Silicon Valleys contributed to a growing sentiment that they don't care beyond business in India, that their ethics and the statements made by them beyond a point are just statements by themselves which are not followed through in practice. Yes, to a large degree. But also, even within United States, they often fail because I check their regulatory requirements, and every time a proposal is made by independent shareholders for appointments of independent human rights experts, it's voted down by those boards. Now, the thing is, ultimately, we should remember who should act when this kind of business environment is lacking. And this does go beyond a little the entity being within India or outside India. It goes to the larger framework of how we recognize global supply chains and a globalized world in which industry works both at the local and the global level, and in which ownership structures are not very well demarcated of an Indian company, which may also be raising private equity capital and may be registered in Singapore, but all the people there are essentially who are working are Indian. It goes towards construction of the policy design, and this duty falls to government. And this again is something which is not being done well enough. If we just view it from the lens of nationality, which is important according to me, but make it the over dominant feature in our policy discourse by itself, I think it does not reflect the underlying reality of the entire ecosystem of how the technology sector operates today in India.
Nikhil, let me ask you a quick final question. A couple of weeks back, I was speaking with Maria Ressa, who is, no stranger to this environment and to this kind of behavior. And it seems like some of that is happening in India as well. What is virtual is slipping into what is physical. For example, the fact that Twitter chose to mark Sambit Patra's content as manipulated content, and that was followed up by an extremely odd visit, as they would like to, call it, by the Delhi police arriving in, a pack of 5 or 6 to the Twitter headquarters. What does this point to? Because it really looks ominous, and it makes people very uncomfortable.
Like I said, these are messages that are being sent. If you look at the cases filed against Twitter executives across the country last year, if you look at how there were cases filed against Amazon executives across the country around Tandav, these are for companies. If there's civil cases filed against them, they have the resources to handle it. But it is when people are targeted, when employees are targeted, that many of these companies then get even more worried. If you look at it, Google, Facebook, both, I think, have job openings for the chief compliance officer, and no one's willing to. People are unwilling to sign up for it because there is criminal liability. So, yeah, because of that risk of the virtual transcending and going to the physical, because of the show of Delhi police with the media in tow, all for show, right? Visiting closed offices. These are all signals, So today it's Twitter, tomorrow it could be Google, then it'll be Facebook, then it'll be Snap. Different entities will. It's probably going to be Amazon as well. It looks like they are being targeted, and within a certain segment of the population, this is being cheered because you're putting big tech, global tech, foreign companies in their place, so to speak. You're showing them that the Indian government is powerful, and by that extension, India is powerful and won't take disobedience lying down in a sense, right? And non-compliance lying down. So, look, Twitter, there's nothing in law that prevents Twitter from adding a manipulated media tag to a message, right? So, there is nothing that prevents him from removing it either. There is a process that's now in place where someone can complain to Twitter. Why does the government need to, for example, get involved when there is a compliance process in place? At that time, there wasn't. Sure, but it's a private citizen on his personal Twitter handle where this is getting done. So the government getting involved to protect members of the ruling party's politicians and party members is a clear indication that they're not going to take this kind of defiance lying down. And it's the way I said it in Feb and in Jan and Feb also. If the government believes that the orders that they have sent are legal and Twitter's defined them because it believes that the orders are not, this needs to go to court. Let them thrash it out. And let's finally get transparency on what kind of orders our government is sending to platforms, because we have none so far. Transparency is going to bring accountability, I hope. But right now, we have none.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you for this great chat. I know it's not on any of our shoulders to point to what the court might do, but I'm just really glad that this conversation is now happening more widely, because ultimately it boils down to what a citizen can or cannot do in the virtual domain. But thank you both so much for joining in and weighing in.
Thank you, Mitali.
Thanks, Mitali.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.